The gavel had not yet fallen when Edna Calloway stood up. 79 years on this earth, and her knees had learned to complain about every small motion. But they did not complain now. She rose from the metal folding chair the way a woman rises from a pew at the end of a long sermon. Slow, steady, certain of what came next. Beside her, Arlo turned his head. His mouth opened, then closed. He had been her husband for 62 years, and in all that time, he had never seen her stand up at an auction. He had never seen her stand up to anything, not in public, not where people could watch. The auctioneer at the front of the room paused mid-sentence. He was a thin man with a clipboard and a voice like dry wheat. He looked at her. He looked at the paper in his hand. He looked back at her. "Ma'am, $300, Edna said. The room laughed. Not loud, not cruel exactly, just that small automatic laugh small towns make when something unexpected happens to someone they have already decided not to take seriously. A man in the back row coughed into his fist. A woman near the window adjusted her purse. Edna did not sit down. She kept her chin level and her eyes forward, and her right hand wrapped around a worn leather handbag that contained in a single wide envelope 9 $100 bills. 9 bills, folded once. Smelling faintly of cedar because they had spent the last 35 years inside a sewing box that smelled of cedar shavings and old thread. Arlo did not know about that envelope. That was about to change. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "I have $300 from the lady. Do I hear $350? Silence stretched across the room like the silence inside a barn at 3 in the morning. Edna did not look around to see who was watching. She knew who was watching. She had been a school teacher for 31 years in this county, and she knew the faces of half the people in this auction hall by their first names, and the other half by their parents' first names. They had all heard what Merritt did. They had all chosen in their own small and quiet ways to look the other way. A voice from the side wall said, $350. Edna turned her head a quarter inch, just enough to see him. Hank Pruitt. Salvage yard out on County Road 9. A heavy man with hands like crushed paper bags and a habit of laughing too soon. He was grinning at her now, not at the Quonset, at her. "You sure you know what you're bidding on, Mrs. Calloway?" Hank called. 3 acres of weeds and a tin can full of rust. The laughter came back, bigger this time. Edna waited until it died. Then she said, $400. Arlo's hand found her wrist. Not to stop her, just to know she was still there. His fingers were cold. He had not eaten since the diner that morning, and the diner had been a slice of toast split between them with butter scraped on so thin the bread showed through. Hank scratched the back of his neck. $450. $500, Edna said. The room got quieter than it had any right to be. Hank looked at her for a long moment. He had expected her to fold at $350. He had expected to walk out of here with 3 acres of land he could strip clean by Sunday. Instead, an old school teacher in a wool coat the color of dust was looking back at him without blinking, and there was something in her eyes he did not like and could not name. He shrugged. He laughed, but the laugh did not land the way he wanted it to. "It's all yours, Mrs. Calloway. Hope you can eat rust." The auctioneer's voice came back to life. $500 from the lady. Going once. Going twice. The gavel struck wood like a single hard knock on a closed door. Sold. And then finally, Edna sat down. Arlo was still looking at her. His mouth was still slightly open. 62 years of marriage, and in all that time she had let him be the one who spoke. The one who decided, the one whose name went on the loan and the lease and the deed. She had stood behind him at the bank and behind him at the dealership, and behind him at the kitchen table when their grown children came to ask for things and demand things, and finally, in the end, take things. She had stood behind him for a long, long time. She was not standing behind him anymore. They walked out of the auction hall into March light, the color of weak tea. The wind had teeth. Scout was waiting in the back of the borrowed church van, his nose pressed against the window, fogging the glass with each breath. When he saw them coming, his tail began to thump against the rear seat in slow, certain time. Behind them, on the steps of the hall, men gathered in small knots and watched them go. Edna did not turn to look. She did not have to. She knew the shape of their watching. She had felt it for 90 days. Edna, Arlo said. She kept walking. Edna, honey, where did the money come from? She stopped at the door of the van and rested her hand on the cold metal handle. The wind pulled a strand of gray hair across her mouth, and she did not bother to push it back. I'll tell you, she said, when we get there. He nodded. He did not ask again. That was something she had always loved about him. Arlo Calloway was a man who could wait. Inside the van, Scout pressed his head against her shoulder and stayed there until she scratched behind his ear. He was 11 years old. He had been with them since he was a puppy in a feed store cardboard box, and in those 11 years, he had learned every door in the old farmhouse and every fence line on the 200-acre farm that had been the Calloway place for 4 generations. The farmhouse was gone now. The farm was gone. The fence lines belonged to a company nobody in Granger County had ever heard of, registered in a city 600 miles away, with a name that looked like it had been generated by a computer to be forgotten. But Scout had not been taken. Scout had jumped into the van the night of the eviction without anyone telling him to, and he had not left since. The van's engine turned over on the second try. Arlo pulled them out of the gravel lot and onto the county road, and they drove west into the thin afternoon toward a place none of the people standing on those steps would have followed them to, even if they had been invited. They drove in silence for a while. The road bent past the old elevator on Route 9, past the closed-down hatchery, past the diner where Arlo had eaten breakfast on the first Saturday of every month for 40 years until last December, when the waitress had stopped meeting his eyes. He glanced at his wife. She was looking out the passenger window at a field that had been theirs once. A field where, in the spring of 1973, she had brought him a thermos of coffee while he changed the oil on a tractor that no longer existed. She had been 42 then. She had been wearing a red scarf. He remembered the scarf better than he remembered most of that decade. You knew, he said quietly, didn't you? She did not turn her head. About Merritt, he said. You knew. She closed her eyes. Yes. The word fell into the cab of the van like a small stone falling into a deep well. They both heard it land. How long? Edna pressed her hand against the window. The cold of the glass pushed back through her thin skin and into the bones underneath. 18 months, she said. Arlo did not speak. He drove. His hands on the wheel were knotted with arthritis and old work, and the skin across his knuckles was the color of paper that had been folded too many times. I didn't have proof, she said. I had a feeling. I had pieces. He came over for Thanksgiving and he asked your blood pressure medication brand. He asked it twice. I noticed because nobody asks that twice unless they're trying to remember it for a form. The van slowed at a stop sign. Arlo waited at the empty intersection longer than the stop required. He took a phone call in the mudroom in February of last year, she went on. I was bringing him a coffee. He turned his back when he saw me. He said the word mother the way you say a password when you've decided to lie about what you were just talking about. You should have told me, Arlo said. I know. Why didn't you? She finally turned to look at him. Because I knew you, Arlo Calloway. I knew you would have called him. You would have asked him outright man to man the way your father would have done. And he would have lied to your face, and you would have believed him because he is your son. And then we would have lost the farm 3 months earlier than we did. And we would not have had the time I needed to put one last thing in place. Arlo's hands tightened on the wheel. What thing? She lifted the leather handbag onto her lap. She unsnapped it. She drew out the white envelope and she set it on the bench seat between them. This, she said. $900. Cash. I started saving it the year Owen turned 12. I have been adding to it for 35 years. Birthday money from my mother. The Christmas bonus the school district gave us in '89. The cash my father left in a coffee can when he died. Anything that came to me alone in my own name that nobody in the family ever counted as ours. Arlo stared at the envelope on the seat. You hid money from me, he said. His voice was not angry. It was something worse than angry. It was a man trying to fit a new shape into an old frame. I hid money for you, Edna said. There's a difference, and someday you'll understand it. The wind pushed the van sideways across the center line. Arlo corrected. He did not speak again until the windshield of the van was full of the long curve of Hollow Creek Road and the brown shoulder of the field beyond. Edna, he said. Yes, I am not angry. I know. I am grateful. She put her hand over his on the wheel. That was all. Hollow Creek Road ran 3/4 of a mile from the county highway to a rusted mailbox that leaned at the angle of a tired man. The mailbox had no name on it. The number had faded into a memory of paint. Beyond the mailbox, the land opened. 3 acres. That was what the auction listing had said. 3 acres, one structure condition listed as salvage. The structure rose out of the weeds like the curved back of a sleeping animal. A Quonset hut. Corrugated steel arched into a half-cylinder 50 feet long. Its skin streaked with rust, the color of dried blood. Vines had climbed 2/3 of the way up the south end. The big sliding door at the front stood ajar by the width of a man's hand, and inside the gap, there was nothing but black. As Arlo eased the van to a stop on the gravel turnaround, he cut the engine. The quiet that filled the cab was the kind of quiet that exists only on land. Nobody has spoken on in a long time. Scout did not wait for an invitation. He was out of the van the second Arlo opened the door. his paws hitting the gravel and then the weeds, his head down his nose, working the air like a man reading a letter he has been waiting all his life to receive. He did not run wild. He never ran wild. He moved with the slow, professional thoroughness of a dog who has spent 11 years checking fence lines, and within 30 seconds, he had circled the front of the Quonset and disappeared around the south corner. Edna stepped down from the van. Her boots crunched in the gravel. The wind off the creek smelled of cold water and old leaves, and something underneath. Both of those things, something earthier. Something that reminded her of the cellar in her grandmother's house when she was a small girl in a small town very far from here. She stood there a long moment. Arlo came around the front of the van and stopped beside her. He did not touch her. He just stood the way he had always stood beside her at the edge of a pasture or a graveside or a hospital room, close enough to be felt, far enough to leave room. "Well," he said, "well, it's ours. It's ours." They walked toward the Quonset together. The sliding door fought them at first. The track was choked with 60 years of dust and bird nest and the small, dry husks of insects that had given up here. Arlo set his shoulder against it. Edna put both hands on the cold steel beside him. Together they pushed, and the door groaned the long groan of something waking up from a sleep it had not chosen. Light fell into the inside of the Quonset for the first time in 20 years, and in that light against the far wall beneath canvas tarps gray with the gray of forgotten things, there were shapes, many shapes, long shapes and tall shapes, and the unmistakable hooded silhouette of a tractor sitting under a sheet. Edna heard herself make a small sound. Not a word, just air. Arlo took 2 steps forward and stopped. "Edna," he said, "I see it. There's equipment in here. I see it. There's a tractor. I see it, Arlo." Scout had come back around through the side and was standing at her right hip. His ears forward, his tail level with his back. He looked up at her once. Then he looked toward the back corner of the Quonset, where the light did not quite reach. He started walking. Edna followed him. She did not know why she followed him instead of Arlo following him. Some part of her understood in that moment that Scout had been leading them somewhere for 90 days, ever since the night of the eviction, when he had jumped into the van without being called. He had been leading them here, to this corner, to this thing he had decided was important. The corner held a set of industrial steel shelves bolted to the wall. The shelves were stacked with boxes and cans and tools wrapped in oilcloth. The cans were the kind of cans the government had stopped making more than 60 years ago. The tools were the kind of tools Arlo's father had owned. Scout sat down in front of the lowest shelf. He looked at Edna. He did not bark. He did not whine. He just looked the way he had looked the morning a neighbor's calf had wandered off and he had led Arlo straight to a draw 3 pastures over, without stopping once to confirm. On the bottom shelf, half pushed behind a roll of copper wire, was a tin box the color of old olive drab. Edna knelt. Her knees made the sound her knees always made now. She drew the box out into the light. It was the size of a small suitcase. It was heavier than it looked. The lock on the front was a brass padlock that had rusted into a single piece with itself. And on the side of the box Stenciled in white paint that had grayed and chipped over the decades were 3 letters: WCC. Behind her, Arlo went very still. Edna. His voice had changed. Edna, those are my father's initials. She set the box on the concrete floor of the Quonset. She did not need to ask if he was sure. Wendell Chester Calloway, the man Arlo had buried in 1978 without ever quite understanding. The man who had come back from Europe in 1946, a quieter man than the boy who had left. The man who had bought the home farm with money nobody could ever quite explain, and who had worked it for 32 years, without once mentioning what he had done in the war, what he had seen or what he had been carrying when he came home. Arlo lowered himself slowly to the concrete beside her. His old knee popped. He didn't seem to notice. How did he... Arlo started and stopped. How did he have this here? Why is this here? I don't know, Edna said. But she was already reaching for the lid. The padlock was rusted open. The hinge gave with a small, dry complaint, and the lid lifted. And inside, preserved by the dry air, and the sealed lid, and the long sleep of 40 years, were the contents of another life. A leather-bound journal cracked along its spine. A bundle of photographs held together with a rubber band that had perished into a brittle gray rope. A pocket watch. The face stopped at 4:17. A stack of manila folders marked in a handwriting Arlo recognized from his own birth certificate. And beneath all of it, folded into careful quarters, a piece of paper the color of tea. Edna's fingers found the journal first. She lifted it out. The leather had cracked, but the binding held. The pages were the heavy stock journals had been made of when men still bought journals to write the truth in. She opened it carefully to the first page. The handwriting was small and exact. Edna read aloud because Arlo's hands were shaking too much to hold the book. August 1946. I found a place to start over. 3 acres on Hollow Creek Road with a Quonset I can convert to storage. Nobody knows about the money yet, and I aim to keep it that way until I'm sure who I can trust. The farm is the priority. Everything else can wait. Arlo did not speak. She turned the page. There were more entries, some short, some long, some only a single line. The dates marched across the years like a slow column of soldiers. 1947, 1948, 1950, 1955. Edna read until her voice ran out, and then she set the journal down and lifted the folded piece of paper from the bottom of the box. She opened it. It was a map. It had been drawn by hand and pencil on the back of a feed mill receipt, dated 1948. The lines were thin and accurate. They showed the outline of 3 acres. They showed the Quonset. They showed the bend of Hollow Creek along the eastern edge of the property. And they showed with the small, unhurried care of a man who had been a surveyor before he had been a soldier. 2 marks. The first mark drawn at the bottom corner of the map was labeled in Wendell Calloway's tight script, First Federal of Des Moines, Box 443, paid through 2020. The second mark was on the property itself. Edna brought the map closer to the light. The mark sat slightly north of the Quonset between the building and the stand of old oaks at the northwest corner. There was no label beside it, only a single small drawing, an arrow pointing down. Arlo leaned in. He saw it. He understood it the same instant she did. "He left something here too," he said. "Yes." "Something he didn't put in the bank." "Yes." Edna. She set the map down on top of the journal. She looked at her husband. Her eyes were dry. Her voice was steady. The wind moved against the curved steel above them with a long, soft, almost human sigh. "Des Moines is 150 miles away," she said. "And we don't know what's in that box, and we don't know if the bank still honors the lease, and we don't know what condition the lease is in after 26 years. No. But this." She tapped the second mark on the map. "This is here. This is on land we own. This we can find tonight." Scout, who had not moved from his spot beside the shelf, made a small sound in his throat. Not a bark. Not a whine. Something in between. The sound a dog makes when he has been waiting for the humans to catch up. Arlo looked at the dog. Then he looked at his wife. Then he looked at the curved steel walls of a building his father had bought in a year. Arlo had been 1 year old, and he understood in a way he had not understood anything in 81 years. That he had not known the man who raised him. Not the way a son is supposed to know a father. Not even close. He pressed his palm flat against the concrete floor of the Quonset. The cold of it went up through his hand and into his arm. "All right," he said. "All right. Show me." But before they could rise, Scout was moving again. He had stood up from his place beside the shelves. He had walked with that same patient professional certainty to a section of the Quonset wall that was hidden behind a stack of wooden crates. He sat down in front of the crates and looked back at Edna. She crossed to him. Arlo followed. Together they pushed the crates aside. They were heavier than they looked. The bottom crate left a long, pale rectangle of dust on the concrete where it had stood undisturbed for a generation. Behind the crates, set flush into the curved wall of the Quonset, was a door. Not the main door. A small one. A man-sized one. Hinged on heavy iron and framed with steel that had been welded directly into the curved wall by a hand that had known how to weld. The padlock on the latch was the same brand as the one on the tin box. Rusted shut. Rusted open. The two states of a lock that has waited too long. Arlo did not need to ask what the door was for. He went to the wall where the tools hung in their oiled outlines, and he lifted down a pair of bolt cutters that had been hanging on the same hook for 60 years. The handles were cold. The blades were sharp. Whoever had stored them here had cared for them the way a person cares for a child. He came back to the door. He set the bolt cutters on the rusted padlock. He looked at Edna. She nodded once. The lock snapped open like a dry bone. The door swung in on hinges that had been oiled by someone the year before Arlo had been born. And beyond the door there were stairs. Concrete stairs. Going down. A long, cold breath of air rose up from below them. It smelled of earth and oil and old paper, and the particular preserved silence of a room that has waited longer than any living person. Edna found a kerosene lantern on the closest shelf. She found matches in a small tin box beside it. The matches were dry. The lantern was full. She struck a match against the side of the tin, and the flame stood up clean and yellow, and reached for the wick like something that had been waiting for the chance. The lantern lit. The wick took. The light bloomed. Scout went down the stairs first. His nails clicked on the concrete in a slow, steady rhythm, and the rhythm faded as he descended. And then he barked once softly from the dark below them. The bark was an invitation. Edna went next. She held the lantern in front of her. Arlo came down behind her with one hand on the wall, and the other hand held out as if to catch her if her knee gave way. The cellar was 30 feet square, poured concrete walls, a floor of poured concrete that was cold even through their boots, a ceiling of heavy timber crossbeams that had been milled from oak that no longer grew anywhere within 50 miles of Granger County. The whole room had been built with the careful underground patience of a man who expected a future he could not name. Shelves lined every wall. The shelves were stacked with the personal life of Wendell Chester Calloway, a trunk with his name stenciled on it in the same army green paint as the tin box upstairs. A row of boxes labeled in his small handwriting. Letters, photos, army records, deeds, glass mason jars of dried things sealed with wax, wool blankets folded inside paper that crinkled when Edna brushed it with the back of her hand. And in the center of the cellar, on a small wooden table that had been built and placed and centered with deliberate care, was a metal box. This one was newer. The lock on it was still bright. Edna walked to the table. She set the lantern down beside the box. Arlo stood at her shoulder. His breath shallow, the cellar light moving across the lines of his old face. "Open it," he said. She did. The lock had not been engaged. It rested on top of the box for show or for habit, or for some reason that had made sense to a man who knew this day would come and trusted finally that whoever found his way down here had earned the right to look inside. Edna lifted the lid. There were 2 envelopes. Both were addressed in the same hand. The first envelope said, Arlo. The second envelope said, Eleanor. Edna stopped breathing for a moment. Eleanor. Not Edna. Eleanor. The name on her birth certificate. The name her mother had used only when she had been a small girl in trouble and which nobody had called her in 57 years. Wendell Calloway had not just known her name. He had known the name underneath the name. The private one. The one she had given up using somewhere around her senior year of high school, and which she had not, in 16 years of holiday dinners at the Calloway farmhouse, ever heard her father-in-law speak. How? How did he know? Arlo made a sound she had not heard him make in 62 years of marriage. It was not a word. It was not a cry. It was the small, soft, involuntary sound of a man who has just learned that his father, dead now for 48 years, knew his daughter-in-law by a name even her husband had almost forgotten she had. Edna lifted the envelopes out of the box one at a time. She handed the first to her husband. He took it with both hands. He sat down slowly on the edge of the wooden trunk beside the table, and he set the envelope on his knee, and he stared at his own name in his father's handwriting like a man looking through a window at a room he had thought was empty. Edna took her own envelope to the far corner of the cellar. She did not know why she walked away to read it. Some old privacy, some sense of meeting a man she had never quite met. She set the lantern on a low shelf. She sat down on a wooden crate. She opened the envelope with the careful patience of a woman who had been opening other people's mail her entire life as a teacher, and had learned never to tear the paper. Inside on a single page was a letter. She read it once. She read it again. The third time she read it, she let the letter fall into her lap, and she lifted both hands and pressed them flat against her face. And for the first time in 90 days, for the first time since the night the sheriff had come to the door and Merritt had stood behind him on the porch with the expression of a stranger, Edna Calloway cried. She cried quietly, with dignity, into her own hands. Across the cellar, Arlo could not hear her. He had opened his own letter. He was reading his own father's words for the first time in his life. His own face was wet, and he was not aware of it, and he would not be aware of it for some time. In her hands, Edna's letter said this. It said that Wendell Calloway had asked her mother in 1961, the week before her first Christmas at the farmhouse, what name his son's young woman had been given on her birth certificate. Her mother, who had liked the careful, quiet man behind the counter of the family business he was visiting that day, had told him, Eleanor, after my own mother. We have called her Edna since she was 13. The letter said that Wendell had thanked her, and that he had gone home, and that he had written the name down in the back of a journal he kept under a floorboard in his study, and that he had decided that same evening that he would speak that name only once in his lifetime. He would speak it in a letter she would read after he was gone, when the speaking would mean something. The letter said that he had watched her at every Sunday supper from 1961 until the autumn before he died, and that he had decided somewhere in the middle of those years that this woman would be the one who would have to carry the family through whatever was coming. It said that he had watched her sit at the kitchen table and listen to Arlo's mother talk about the price of beef. It said that he had seen her really listen the way only a certain kind of woman ever learns to listen. It said, I knew Arlo would need you to get here. He always needed you more than either of you knew. It said, the key belongs to both of you, but you will know what to do with it. It said at the end in handwriting that had begun to shake by the time it reached the bottom of the page, you were not a stranger to me, Eleanor. You were never a stranger. I called you by your true name only once and only on paper because I did not want to waste it. I have been saving it for today. She let the letter fall. She covered her face. Outside, above the Quonset, the March wind moved across 3 acres of weeds and rust and rebuilt promise, and the sun lowered itself toward the line of oaks, where a map drawn in 1948 still pointed to something hidden. In the cellar, in the lantern light, Scout walked across the cold concrete and lay down with his head on Edna's foot and stayed there until she could breathe again. When she could finally breathe again, when her chest unlocked and the air came back to her in the long, careful pull of a woman who had taught children to count their breath in 4s. Edna Calloway picked up the letter. She folded it. She tucked it into the inside pocket of her wool coat against her heart, where she could feel the paper move when she moved. Then she crossed the cellar to her husband. Arlo was still sitting on the trunk. His own letter was open in his hands. He looked up at her and his eyes were red, and his mouth worked once before any sound came out of it. He loved me, Arlo said. I didn't know. I know. He didn't say it. Not once. Not in my whole life. I know. He was just so quiet, Edna. He was so quiet. And I thought, I know what you thought. Arlo's hand reached up. She took it. She held it against her own face for a long moment. The skin of his palm was rough, where it had always been rough and warm, where it had always been warm. And she pressed her cheek into it and closed her eyes. He left a letter for you, too, Arlo said quietly. Didn't he? Yes. Was it kind? Yes. He nodded. He looked away. She understood. Some things a man cannot ask about even from his wife. The lantern flickered. The cellar held them. Scout watched from his place at her feet. Edna, Arlo said. Yes. Des Moines is a long drive. Yes. And we can't go tomorrow. We don't have the gas. We don't have the money. We don't have anything. She thought about the white envelope lighter now that had funded the auction. $400 left. $400 between them and the next 90 days. No, she said. We don't. Then we need to find something first. Yes. The mark on the map. Yes. Arlo straightened. The years did not fall off him exactly. He was still 81. His knees still hurt. His hands still shook in the morning. But something in him stood up that had not stood up since the night Merritt had come to the porch with the sheriff. All right, he said. Tonight. Tonight. They came up out of the cellar with the kerosene lantern between them. They stepped out of the Quonset into a light the color of brass and old whiskey. The sun was lowering itself toward the oaks. The wind had eased. Arlo found a shovel hanging on the tool wall. The handle was hickory hand-shaped, the wood polished smooth by years of his father's grip. He carried it across the gravel turnaround and into the weeds, and Edna walked beside him with the map folded in her free hand, and Scout walked ahead of both of them. They found the place where the second mark sat. It was a small clearing between the Quonset and the oaks. The ground was uneven. A flat fieldstone the size of a dinner plate lay half buried in the weeds. And Edna realized when she knelt to brush the dead grass away from it that the stone had been set there on purpose. It had been laid like a marker. It had been waiting. Arlo set the lantern on the ground. He looked at her. She looked at him. Together, she said. Together. He set the blade of the shovel against the dirt beside the stone. He pushed it in with the weight of his boot. The earth gave more easily than either of them had expected, because the dirt here had been turned once before a long time ago, by the same man who had laid the stone. They worked slowly. Two old people with one shovel, and an 11-year-old dog and a kerosene lantern that threw their shadows long across 3 acres of forgotten land. They took turns. Edna did not have the strength to dig for long, but she could lift the lighter loads aside and she could hold the lantern steady when the light began to slip into purple. 20 minutes in the shovel struck something that was not earth. The sound was wood. Arlo stopped. He looked at Edna. She did not have to tell him what to do. He knelt down with his old knees complaining, and he brushed the last of the dirt away with his hands. A wooden lid emerged. A box. About the size of a footlocker, but shallower. The wood had been treated with something. pitch, maybe, or wax, something that had held against the years. The lid had a single iron handle blackened with age, but still solid. Arlo lifted it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and laid in straight, even rows, were 5 things. A long-barreled rifle, cleaned and oiled and sealed in cloth that smelled faintly of cosmoline. A man's wedding ring, plain gold, with a date scratched on the inside. A small wooden cigar box that rattled when Arlo lifted it. A leather-bound ledger. And on top of all of it, a single envelope. The envelope said, in the same hand they had now seen 3 times tonight, "For the day you find this." Arlo's hand closed around the envelope. He looked up at his wife. The lantern light caught the side of his face. There were tears on it that he was no longer trying to hide. "Edna," he said, "open it." He opened it. He read it. His mouth moved with the words, but no sound came out. When he was done, he handed it up to her without speaking. She held it close to the lantern. The letter was short. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and you have come back to Hollow Creek, the way I always hoped you would not have to. There is more than the bank in Des Moines. There is what is in this box, which I leave to you and to the woman you marry, whoever she turns out to be, because I cannot know her yet. And I trust your judgment on that more than I trust my own on anything else. The ledger will tell you what to do. Read it before you go to Des Moines. Read it twice. There are people in this county who will come for you when they learn that I left anything behind. Do not let them. The land provides for those who do not give up on it. I am gone, but I am also still here in the ground we are standing on. So are you. So is she." Edna lowered the letter. The wind moved across the clearing. Somewhere out beyond the oaks, the creek made its small night sound. She looked at her husband and at the open wooden box at his feet, and at the dog who had led them across 3 acres and down a flight of cellar stairs and out into the dark to find the thing his father had buried for him before he was born. "Arlo," she said. "Yes. He left us a map, and a bank, and a box. Yes. What did he leave the rest of them?" Arlo looked up at her. The wind caught the brim of his cap. "Nothing," he said quietly. "He left us everything. He left them nothing." She nodded. Behind them, the Quonset stood against the last light of the sky, its curved steel roof catching the brass of the sunset along the line of its spine. From a distance, it still looked like a sleeping animal. From a distance, it still looked like rust and ruin and the joke of a town that had decided to laugh at an old woman in a wool coat. But Edna Calloway had stopped caring what the town saw from a distance. She had not stood up at the auction for them. She had stood up for the man at her side, and the dog at her feet, and the 78-year-old letter folded against her heart, and the second life that had just begun in the half-light at the edge of a buried wooden box on 3 acres of land that nobody in Granger County had wanted. She bent down. She picked up the ledger. "Let's go inside," she said. "Let's read it before the lantern dies." They walked back to the Quonset together. The light was almost gone when they reached the door. Scout went in ahead of them the way he had been going in ahead of them their whole long marriage, and Edna paused on the threshold and looked back just once at the gravel road that led to the county highway. Somewhere down that road, Merritt Calloway was sitting in a house that had been built with money borrowed against his parents' farm. Somewhere down that road, Phyllis Calloway was telling a friend on the phone that her parents had finally lost their minds, that they had bought a tin can full of rust for $500, that they were going to die out there if somebody did not do something. Somewhere down that road, the laughter from the auction hall was still going. Edna let it go. She stepped inside and slid the great door closed behind her, and the laughter and the road and the long 90 days fell away into the dark on the other side of the steel. Inside, under the curved roof of a building her father-in-law had bought in the year she was born, Edna Calloway lit a second lantern from the first and sat down beside her husband at a small table he had pulled out of the shadows and opened a ledger that had not been read by living eyes in 48 years. She found the first entry. She found the second. She found on the 7th page the figure that made her set the ledger down very carefully and reach for her husband's hand across the table. "Arlo," she whispered, "tell me, it isn't 600,000. What?" "Arlo." She looked up. The lantern light caught her wet eyes and her steady mouth and the small white edge of the letter against her heart. "It's more." The ledger took them 3 hours. Outside, the night closed down over Hollow Creek Road. The wind that had been kind to them at sunset turned colder after dark, and the curved steel of the Quonset began to tick and groan the way old steel does when the temperature drops. Scout had moved twice, once to the door where he stood listening to something neither of them could hear, and once back to Edna's feet where he flopped down with a long sigh and gave up on the noises of the dark. Arlo had built a small fire in the rusted barrel stove they had found, pushed against the south wall. The stove worked. The chimney pipe was clear. The wood Wendell Calloway had stacked along the back wall a long time ago burned hot and dry and smelled of oak that had been cut from a tree that no longer existed. The light from the open stove door threw the lines of Arlo's old face into a deeper relief than the lanterns could manage. The ledger lay between them on the small wooden table. It was not a complicated document. Wendell Calloway had been many things in his life, but flashy had not been one of them. He had kept his books the way a careful man keeps a fence line: straight, simple, built to outlast him. Each entry held a date, an amount, a name of an institution, and a small handwritten code Edna realized after the first dozen entries was Wendell's own private system for tracking which holdings sat where. She read the entries out loud one at a time because Arlo's eyes had started to water in the lantern light, and he was too proud to admit he could not see the small numbers anymore. A purchase of railroad bonds in 1949, $1,200. A purchase of utility stock in 1952, $800. A purchase of a small mutual fund in 1957, $3,000. A series of regular deposits into a savings instrument at First Federal of Des Moines, every quarter, without fail, from 1946 until the month before he died. Edna kept reading. Arlo kept listening. Scout kept breathing slow and even at her feet. When she reached the back third of the ledger, the entries changed shape. Wendell had begun in the late 1960s to write small notes in the margins, not financial notes, personal ones, reminders to himself, almost like prayers. Margin note 1968. Beside a deposit of $200. For Arlo's wife, whoever she becomes. The boy will need someone who can do what I cannot. Margin note 1971. Beside another deposit. Eleanor is a good name. Strong. The kind that holds. Margin note 1975. Beside the last deposit Wendell would ever make in person, before his heart began its long, quiet betrayal. They will not understand any of this until they need it. Lord, let them need it late. Edna's voice cracked at the last one. She set the ledger down. She pressed 2 fingers under each eye the way she had done in front of 2 generations of children at the front of a classroom. When something on the radio that morning had been too sad to talk about, Arlo did not say anything. He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. The fire popped in the barrel stove. The Quonset ticked. Outside somewhere along the creek, a barred owl called and was answered by another barred owl, and the call moved over the 3 acres like a slow blessing. When Edna could speak again, she said, "There's a final page. Read it." She turned to it. The final page of the ledger was not a tally. It was a sentence. One sentence written in the same tight hand dated the spring of 1977. 6 months before Wendell Calloway would die in a hospital bed in Granger with his wife, holding one hand and a nurse holding the other, and his only son 60 miles away on a tractor. He did not know was the last tractor his father would ever see him drive. The sentence said, "If you are reading this with the woman you married, then I built the right house." Edna closed the ledger. She placed her palms flat on the cover. She did not cry this time. She had cried enough for one night. She had cried enough for 1 decade. She looked up at her husband across the small table, and the firelight moved across her face, and she said, "Arlo Calloway, we are going to Des Moines on Friday." "Yes, ma'am." "And we are going to do this right." "Yes, ma'am." "And we are not going to tell anyone." "No. Not Owen, not Phyllis, not anyone at the diner, not anyone at the church. We are going to drive there, and we are going to walk into that bank, and we are going to come home with whatever your father left us, and then we are going to sit down at this table, and we are going to decide what to do with it. The 2 of us. With Scout. Nobody else." "Yes, ma'am." She nodded once. The decision sat down in the room and made itself comfortable. They went to bed that night on cots they had unfolded from a stack of Army surplus bedding in the cellar. Wool blankets, old but clean. Edna lay on her back in the dark with Arlo's breathing slowing beside her, and Scout's warmth against her left foot, and she stared up at the curved ribs of steel above them, and thought about the 18 months she had carried Merritt's coming betrayal alone, and the 35 years she had carried that envelope alone, and the 62 years she had carried the weight of a household alone, while the world watched her husband and called him the head of it. She was not angry about any of it. That was the surprise. She was tired, and she was sore, and she was old. But she was not angry. Some weight had come off her in the cellar tonight. Some long unspoken bookkeeping had been settled in a letter she had not asked for in handwriting she had never seen until 2 hours ago, from a man she had met only at Sunday dinners 48 years dead. "You are not a stranger to me, Eleanor. You were never a stranger." She fell asleep with her hand on Scout's back. Friday came on slowly. They spent Wednesday and Thursday at Hollow Creek, doing what Arlo called the small work. He cleared more of the Quonset. Edna sorted through the cellar with a notebook and a sharp pencil cataloging what was down there, because Wendell Calloway had built the cellar like a library, and Edna had been a teacher long enough to know that any library that has not been read is the same as a library that has been burned. She made lists, tools by category, canned goods by year, letters by sender. The trunk with Wendell's name on it she did not open yet. There would be time. There would be time. On Thursday morning, Arlo drove the van into Granger and sold the second of the 3 diesel drums he had found in the Quonset. Grover Mast met him in the back lot of the feed store and counted out the cash in 20s and did not say anything about the auction. He did not have to. The 2 old men shook hands the long, slow way men shake hands when they have known each other for 50 years and lost more than they can say. On the way back to the van, Grover called after him. Arlo. Arlo turned. There's people in town asking about you. Arlo waited, asking what you found out there on Hollow Creek. Who's asking? Grover scratched the back of his neck the way men of their generation scratch the back of their necks when they are trying to figure out how much of a thing to say. I don't know names, Grover said, but it ain't a stranger asking. Whoever it is, they know which questions to ask. They know about the Quonset. They know about the cellar. Arlo's stomach went cold. Who would know about the cellar? That's the thing. Grover spat into the gravel. Nobody knew about the cellar, Arlo. Not in town. Your daddy never told a soul. Whoever's asking, they didn't learn it here. Arlo drove home with both hands tight on the wheel. He did not tell Edna right away. He waited until they had finished dinner. Scrambled eggs on the camp stove. Bread Grover had pressed into his hand at the truck. They ate on cots beside the warm barrel stove, and Scout ate his portion out of a tin pie plate on the floor. And when the plates were empty, Arlo set his down and said very quietly, Edna, somebody is asking after us in Granger. She did not look up right away. She was wiping her fingers on a cloth napkin she had washed twice in well water and dried in the sun. Who? Grover doesn't know. How much do they know about us? Enough to ask about the cellar. She set the napkin down. The firelight moved across her face. He had been her husband for 62 years. He had seen every shape her face could take. He had never seen the one it took right then. Then we leave for Des Moines tonight, she said. It's 150 miles. I know how far it is. You won't sleep. I haven't slept properly in 90 days, Arlo. I'll sleep when we get home. He looked at her for a long moment. He nodded. They left at 10 o'clock at night with Scout in the back of the van and a thermos of black coffee on the bench seat between them and a manila folder containing Wendell Calloway's letter. His ledger, a copy of his death certificate from a drawer in the cellar, and Arlo's own driver's license clipped to the top. They drove west on the county highway through a country that grew flatter and emptier as the miles passed. The sky over Iowa in the small hours of a March night is a thing that anyone who has not seen it cannot really understand. It is more sky than land. It is more dark than dark. The stars come down to the horizon on every side, and a man feels driving under them like he is moving across the bottom of a great cold sea. Edna did not sleep. She sat with her hand on Arlo's right knee for most of the drive. The way she had sat with her hand on his knee on the night they had driven home from the hospital with their first child, 63 years ago, and the night they had driven home from the hospital with her mother's body 21 years ago, and the night they had driven home from the courthouse 3 months ago, with a piece of paper in her lap that said the farm no longer belonged to them. Some hands a woman puts on a man's knee to ask. Some she puts there to say. Hers was saying. They reached Des Moines at 1 in the morning. The city rose up out of the prairie in a low sprawl of orange streetlight and gas station signs, and the kind of half-empty office towers small Midwestern capitals build for themselves, and then never quite fill. Arlo found a truck stop on the east edge of town. He pulled the van into the back of the lot behind a row of long-haul rigs, and he killed the engine, and the two of them slept for 4 hours sitting upright on the bench seat with Scout draped across their laps. When the sky began to gray, they woke up. Arlo bought 2 cups of coffee and 2 breakfast sandwiches inside the truck stop with 5 of Grover's 20s. They ate in the van with the windows down. Scout got the eggs and most of the bread. The coffee was bitter and hot and exactly what Edna needed. At 8:45, Arlo pulled the van up in front of a building that had been 3 different banks in its lifetime and was now, according to the brass letters on its limestone face, Prairie Heritage Financial. The doors had not opened yet. Edna got out of the van. She straightened her wool coat. She adjusted the collar. She ran one hand back through her gray hair, the way a woman does before she walks into a room she does not intend to walk out of empty-handed. "Arlo," she said. "Yes." "You let me do the talking." "Yes, ma'am." "Until I say otherwise." "Yes, ma'am." Scout fell in at her left hip without being asked. He had spent the last hour drinking water from a paper cup Arlo had filled for him at the truck stop. He looked for an 11-year-old farm dog, like a creature who had been born to walk into a bank. At 9 o'clock exactly, the doors unlocked. Edna walked in. The woman behind the front desk looked up. She was perhaps 50. Iron-gray bob, a small silver cross at her throat, a nameplate on the desk that said, Dorothea Finch Branch Manager. Dorothea Finch's eyes moved from Edna to Arlo to Scout and back to Edna. And her face did something interesting. It did not soften exactly. It set. The way a face sets when a person who has been doing a job for 30 years recognizes the kind of day she's about to have. "Good morning," Dorothea said. "Good morning," Edna said. "My name is Eleanor Calloway. My husband is Arlo Calloway. We are here about Safe Deposit Box 443, originally rented in 1946. By my husband's father, Wendell Chester Calloway. We have documents." She set the manila folder on the desk. Dorothea Finch looked at the folder. She looked at Edna. She picked up her phone, dialed 3 numbers, and said very quietly into the receiver, "Cancel my 10 o'clock. Then she stood up. "Mrs. Calloway," she said. "Mr. Calloway, please come with me." They followed her into a small office at the back of the lobby. There was a desk. There were 2 leather chairs. There was a window looking out over a parking lot where the first commuters of the morning were arriving in their sensible sedans. Dorothea closed the door behind them and gestured to the chairs. Scout sat down beside Edna's chair before she did. Dorothea looked at him for a long moment. Service animal. Best friend, Edna said. Dorothea's mouth did something that was almost a smile but did not commit. We have a policy on service animals. We do not have a policy on best friends. As long as he is well behaved, he is welcome. Scout did not move a muscle. He understood in the way Scout understood most things that his job at this moment was to be a credit to the species. He delivered. Dorothea sat down behind the desk. She opened the manila folder. She read. She read for a long time, longer than Edna had expected. Edna watched her face while she read the way Edna had watched the faces of children reading aloud in front of her classroom for 31 years. And she saw in Dorothea Finch's careful expression the moment the woman understood what she was holding. It came around the second page of Wendell's letter. Dorothea's eyes stopped moving. Her shoulders settled half an inch lower in her chair. Her right hand, which had been resting on the edge of the desk, lifted and pressed lightly against her own throat. When she looked up, her voice had gone very gentle. Mrs. Calloway, Box 443 has been on our internal watch list for 6 years. Watch list, Edna said. Yes. When First Federal was absorbed into our parent institution in 1998, we inherited a number of long-dormant accounts whose lease payments had been prepaid in advance. Box 443 was prepaid through 2020. When the payments stopped, we began the process of attempting to contact the registered renter. My father-in-law died in 1978, Arlo said. Yes, we were not told that. Nobody knew to tell you. Dorothea nodded slowly. Yes, we understand that now. The account had no living contact on file. Standard procedure would have moved the contents to unclaimed property after 2025. We are inside that window. She looked down at the folder again. Mr. Calloway, she said, your father was a careful man. He prepaid this box's lease for 74 years. Arlo made a small sound. 74 years, he repeated. Yes, the original lease was for life of the renter plus 75 years. We do not see those leases anymore. We have not written one of those leases since 1961. Your father purchased one of the last of them, and he purchased it the month he opened the box. Edna felt her own throat tighten. He knew, she said. He knew we wouldn't come for a long time. He knew you might not come at all, Dorothea said. And he wanted to leave the door open anyway. The room held its breath for a moment. Then Dorothea stood up. Let me get the box. She walked them down a flight of carpeted stairs into a basement vault that smelled of old metal and conditioned air. The vault was lined with rows of bronze-faced safe deposit boxes. The small ones at the top, the large ones at the bottom. Dorothea moved through the rows like a woman in a library she had memorized as a girl. Box 443 was on the bottom row near the back. It was larger than Edna had imagined. 18 inches long, a foot deep. The kind of box a bank stops offering to retail customers after a certain decade because nobody wants that much space anymore. Dorothea produced a master key. She held out her hand for Edna's key. Edna's key had been taped to the bottom of the metal box in the cellar. Arlo had cleaned it gently with vinegar on Wednesday morning. The brass had come back to a soft butter color. Edna handed it to Dorothea, and Dorothea inserted both keys into the 2 locks on the front of the box. and turned them at the same time, and the box slid free of the wall on a long, quiet runner. She carried it to a viewing table. She set it down. "I will give you privacy," she said. "Take your time. When you are ready, knock on the door and I will come back." She left. The vault door closed behind her with a sound like a held breath. Edna and Arlo stood on either side of the table. Scout sat between their feet. Above the table, a single fluorescent light hummed at a frequency Edna had not heard since she stopped teaching. She put her hand on the lid. She looked at her husband. "Together," she said. "Together." She lifted the lid. Inside the box, organized with the same careful patience Wendell Calloway had brought to every other thing he had touched, were the contents of an inheritance. A bundle of stock certificates held together with twine. The twine had perished, but the certificates had not. The paper was the heavy engraved paper of mid-century corporate America. The kind of paper that announces by its weight alone that the company that printed it expected to outlive everyone in the room. A stack of bearer bonds, sealed in a small canvas envelope marked in Wendell's hand for use if needed. A savings passbook from First Federal of Des Moines, last entry dated April of 1985. The balance, written in blue ink in a teller's hand, was $47,000 and change. And on top of it all, 2 envelopes. One said, Arlo. The other said, Eleanor. Edna's hand went to the second envelope before she could think about it. She lifted it out. She held it in both hands. She did not open it yet. She turned to Arlo and she found him already opening his own. He was crying again. He had not this time even pretended otherwise. She watched him read his father's second letter to him. She watched his shoulders rise and fall once. She watched him fold the letter very carefully and put it inside his coat against his own heart, the way she had folded the cellar letter against hers. Then he looked at her. "Read yours," he said. "I want to be in the room when you do." She opened it. It was not from Wendell. It was from Harriet. Harriet Calloway, Arlo's mother, who had died in 1992 of pneumonia, in a bed in the same house Arlo had been born in. Harriet, who had folded her own son's sheets and pressed her own husband's collars and gone to her grave as far as anyone living had known, without ever saying a word about a safe deposit box in Des Moines. The letter was dated April of 1989. It was 3 pages long. It said, "My dear Eleanor." It said, "Wendell did not tell you any of this because Wendell did not tell anyone anything until he was certain of it. But I want you to know that I knew. I knew from the first Christmas Arlo brought you home in 1961. I knew when you sat in our kitchen and listened to me complain about the price of beef. And you did not look bored or pitying. I knew when you washed the dishes that night without asking. I knew when you laughed at one of Wendell's terrible jokes and did not pretend it was funnier than it was. You did not flatter him. He could not abide flattery. You laughed at the small, true part of his joke, and you let the rest of it go. That was when he turned to me at the sink and said very quietly in the voice he used only with me, "Harriet, the boy has found one. He may not deserve her yet, but God willing he will grow into deserving her." Edna stopped reading. She had to. Arlo was watching her. She started again. "I am writing this in the spring of 1989 because I do not know how much longer I have. and because there are some things a mother-in-law should say to her son's wife while there is still time. I went to Des Moines last month on the bus. Tobias Wren drove me to the station and met me at the bank on the other end. Tobias has been carrying Wendell's secrets in his office for 40 years, and he agreed to carry one more for me. I gave him this letter at the bank that morning, and he placed it in the box for me. I did not have a key. Wendell hid the key on the home property the year I turned 40. He did not tell me where. He told me only that when the day came, somebody who deserved to find it would find it. I trusted that then. I am trusting it now. Edna's voice failed for a moment. She breathed. She kept reading. The first thing I want to say is that I am sorry. I am sorry for the small ways I was distant with you in the early years. I was raised to believe that a woman my age should keep her distance from a younger woman in order to give her room to become herself. I see now that what you needed from me was not room. You had room. What you needed was a witness. I should have been a better one. The second is this. Wendell told me many years ago about Hollow Creek. He told me about the Quonset and the box in Des Moines, and the money he was saving for whatever storm came next. He told me because he could not keep it from me forever, and because he trusted me, and because he wanted at least one other person in the world to know, in case he died before he could give it away. I have carried that knowledge for 32 years. I have carried it longer than I carried either of my pregnancies. I have decided in writing this letter that when I die, I will not pass it on. I will trust the system Wendell built. I will trust that when the day comes, the right hands will find it. I have decided also that the right hands will be yours. Edna's voice cracked. She did not stop. She had not stopped for a class of crying children when the principal had come in to say a student's father had been killed in a tractor accident long ago, and she did not stop now. Arlo took the letter from her gently. He read the rest aloud. I am old, and I am tired, and I am not as strong as I once was. But there is one thing I have learned in 70 years of being a wife and a mother, and a farm woman on the high plains of this country, and it is this. There is always one person in a family who is the root system that nobody sees. Wendell was the oak. Arlo is the oak. You, Eleanor, are the roots. You are the part that holds when the wind comes. You are the part that keeps the tree from going over when the storm decides to be honest. You will never be thanked for it the way you ought to be. Nobody thanks roots. But I want you to know before I die that I saw you. I saw you the whole time. And so did Wendell. He saw you before he died, and he wrote about you in his last journal. And he asked me to make sure that when the day came you would know. The day is coming, Eleanor. I do not know what shape it will take. I know only that it is coming and that you will be the one to meet it. Be brave when it comes. Be brave in the small ways and the large ways. Trust the dog. Trust your husband. Trust yourself. With love that began as duty and grew into something far better. Harriet. Arlo lowered the letter. He set it down on the table beside the savings passbook, and the bearer bonds, and the bundle of stock certificates, and the small, bright, unread future of two old people in a basement vault in Des Moines. He could not speak. Edna could not speak. Scout between their feet made a low sound in his throat that was the closest a dog comes to weeping. A long time passed. When Edna finally lifted her face, it was to her husband. "Tobias Wren," she said. "Yes. He has been waiting for us to come find him for 40 years. Yes. Then he is the second call we make after Grover. Before anyone else. Yes." She placed her palm on the top of the table flat, the way she had placed her palm on the cover of the ledger the night before, the way a woman places her palm on a closing door she does not intend to open again until she is ready. "I am not the same woman who walked into this bank an hour ago," she said. "No," Arlo said, "and I am not going to be the same woman when I walk out of it. No. Are you all right with that?" He looked at her for a long moment in the fluorescent light of a basement vault in Des Moines, Iowa, with their dog at their feet, and a small fortune on the table, and 78 years of his father's silence, and a mother-in-law's posted letter, finally giving way under the weight of 2 careful pages. "Edna," he said, "I have been waiting for you to walk out of that bank as that woman for 40 years. I've just been too dumb to say it out loud." She put her hand on his face. "You are not dumb," she said. "You are slow. There is a difference, and someday you will understand it." They walked out of the vault 40 minutes later with the contents of Box 443 in a banker's bag Dorothea Finch had given them at no charge. The bag was canvas navy blue, with the old First Federal logo embroidered in faded gold on the side. Dorothea had taken one look at it on a shelf in the back of her office and decided it had been waiting for them too. She walked them to the front door of the building. At the door, she turned to Edna. She did not shake her hand. She put both her hands on Edna's shoulders, the way one woman puts her hands on another woman's shoulders when the moment calls for something more honest than a handshake. "Mrs. Calloway, yes, I want you to be careful going home." "Why?" Dorothea Finch's eyes did not move from Edna's. "Because in the last 6 months, I have had 3 separate inquiries about Box 443 from people who were not authorized to ask. I logged each one. I did not give out information. But I want you to know that someone has been looking for what you just took out of my vault, Mrs. Calloway. And they have been looking for it for a while." Edna did not flinch. "Who?" she said. "Who? I cannot tell you names. I do not know all of them. But I can tell you that one of the inquiries came from an attorney in your home county, and one came from a man who said he was Wendell Calloway's grandson." Arlo's face went the color of cold milk. Edna's did not change. "Thank you, Dorothea," she said. "You are welcome, Eleanor. What is your first name short for?" The branch manager's mouth twitched. "Nothing. My mother just liked the sound of it." "It is a good name," Edna said. "Strong. The kind that holds." Dorothea Finch laughed once soft. "You are going to be all right, Mrs. Calloway." "Yes," Edna said. "I am going to be." They walked out into the gray morning of a Friday in March in Des Moines, Iowa, with a canvas bag full of paper, and a dog walking at their hip, and a long drive ahead of them on a road that somewhere along its length had been seeded with men who were hoping to meet them. Arlo did not start the van right away. He sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel. He looked at his wife. "Edna." "Yes." Merritt has been looking for this since before the eviction. Yes, he didn't lose money in a bad investment. He didn't take the farm to cover a loss. He took the farm to fund the search, to pay lawyers to find out what my father left, to pay people to ask the right questions in the right offices. Yes, he has been hunting for this our whole retirement. Yes. Edna. Yes. Why did your hand not shake in there? She opened her purse. She took out a small leather notebook. The cover was navy. The pages were lined. On the inside front cover, in her own careful schoolteacher's hand, was a title. Things I Have Seen. Because, she said, I have been waiting too. I just did not know what I was waiting for. Now I do. Arlo looked at the notebook. He did not reach for it. He understood in the way he had always understood things that belonged to her, that the notebook was not for him to open today. He started the van. They pulled away from the curb in front of Prairie Heritage Financial, and they turned east into the long, flat road that led back across the heart of Iowa toward a Quonset hut on 3 acres of weeds at the end of Hollow Creek Road, and Edna Calloway, 79 years old, with her father-in-law's signature on the bag at her feet, and her mother-in-law's posted letter against her heart, opened the notebook in her lap. The entries were short, dated, specific. She read them back to herself for the first time in a year and a half. April 14th last year. Merritt asked about Arlo's blood pressure medication brand. Asked twice. May 2 last year. Merritt on the phone in the mudroom. Said the word mother when he saw me come in. July 19 last year. Merritt asked Arlo to sign a courtesy power of attorney for medical decisions only. Arlo signed. I did not look at the document before he signed it. I should have. September 10 last year. Phyllis stopped calling on Sundays. She started calling on Wednesdays. Wednesdays are the days Merritt has lunch with her in the city. October 22 last year. The man from the title office called the farm. He left a voicemail for Mr. Merritt Calloway. Merritt did not live at the farm. He has not lived at the farm in 30 years. December 1 last year. The sheriff came to the door. Merritt was on the porch behind him. Edna closed the notebook. She closed her eyes. The van moved east through the cold, flat country of central Iowa. When she opened her eyes again, she was not crying. She was not angry. She was something quieter than both and older than both and harder than both. She turned in her seat. She looked at her husband. Arlo, she said. Yes. When we get home, I am going to need you to do something for me. Anything. I'm going to need you to set up the kitchen table by the stove, the one your father built. I'm going to need you to put 4 chairs around it, and I'm going to need you to call Merritt and tell him that his mother wants to see him on Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock at Hollow Creek Road. Arlo's hands tightened on the wheel. Edna, I know what I am asking. Edna, you are not well enough to. I am well enough, she said. I have been well enough for 18 months. I am the one who has not let myself know it. She turned the navy notebook over once in her lap, the way Harriet might have turned her own ledger over, in her own kitchen. He has been hunting us, Arlo. He has been hunting us since before the farm. I will not be hunted in my own home anymore. He can come to me. He can sit at the table your father built. He can look his mother in the eye. And then he can leave knowing that I saw him coming the whole time. And I let him come anyway because I needed to be sure. Arlo drove for a long time without speaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Sunday at 2:00, he said. "Yes." "In your father's kitchen?" "Yes." "All right, Edna. All right." The road ran east toward Hollow Creek Road. The sky over Iowa lay flat and gray and enormous. Scout slept in the back of the van with his head on the canvas bag. And somewhere out ahead of them on a county road they had not yet reached a son was about to be invited home. He did not know yet. He would. They got back to Hollow Creek Road at 4 in the afternoon on Friday. The light was already going out of the sky when Arlo turned the van off the county highway and onto the gravel of their own driveway. March in Iowa is a month that gives back light slowly and takes it away fast. By the time the Quonset rose up out of the brown fields ahead of them, half lit in the rust-colored end of the day, it looked less like the building they had bought a week ago, and more like a place that had been waiting for them their entire lives. Edna did not get out of the van right away. She sat with the canvas bag on her lap and the notebook against her thigh, and she looked through the windshield at the long curved roof of her father-in-law's secret, and she let herself for the first time in 90 days feel the weight of being home. It was a strange feeling. The land was not the land she had spent 62 years on. The house was not a house at all. The neighbors were strangers. The roads were not the roads she had memorized. But something in her chest, the part of her that had learned in childhood to recognize the shape of a place that meant to keep her recognize this place. She let the recognition sit in her for a long moment. Then she opened the door of the van. Arlo carried the canvas bag inside. She carried the notebook. Scout went ahead of both of them the way Scout always went ahead, his tail held level, his nose already working the cold air. Inside the Quonset, the barrel stove had gone out during the day. The interior was cold and quiet, but the cold was different now. It was not the cold of an abandoned place. It was the cold of a home whose people had been gone for a few hours and were coming back. Arlo started a new fire. Edna unpacked the bag at the small wooden table by the stove. She laid the stock certificates out first. Then the bearer bonds in their canvas envelope. Then the savings passbook. Then the 2 letters, his and hers, side by side. When the fire was going, Arlo came back to the table. He looked at everything she had laid out. He sat down across from her. "Edna," he said. "Yes." "On Sunday." "Yes." "What are you going to say to him?" She thought about it. She thought about it the way she had thought about every important thing in her life, which was the way a school teacher thinks about a sentence she is about to write on a chalkboard for 30 children to copy. Slowly. Once. "I'm going to tell him that I saw him coming," she said. "And I am going to tell him that I let him come. And I am going to tell him that he is welcome at this table for 1 hour. And then he is going to drive away. And he is not coming back to this land for as long as I am alive on it." Arlo nodded. And then we are going to start again." "Yes. Tomorrow," she said. "I want you to call Tobias Wren, the lawyer." "Yes, your father trusted him. Your mother trusted him. He drove her to the bus station in 1989, and met her in Des Moines and put her letter in the box with his own hands. He has been carrying this whole story by himself for 40 years. It is time we relieved him of that weight. Arlo's mouth moved at the corner. It was almost a smile. The first one Edna had seen on his face in 3 months. "All right," he said. "I'll call him in the morning." She nodded once. She closed the canvas bag. She slid it under the table by her feet. Then she reached across and took her husband's hand, and they sat together in the firelight in a Quonset hut on 3 acres of land that nobody in Granger County had wanted. And they did not speak for a long time, because there was nothing left to say that the day had not already said for them. Tobias Wren came out to Hollow Creek Road on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. He arrived in a Buick that was almost as old as he was. He drove it the way a man drives a horse he has had for 30 years, without thinking about it and without trusting any other horse. He parked beside the van. He got out slowly with the small dignity of an old man who has learned to be patient with his own knees, and he stood beside the open car door for a moment, looking at the Quonset. "Well," he said when Arlo came out to meet him, "Wendell would have liked this." "Liked what?" "That it took you 81 years to find it, and that when you did, you found it with the right person beside you." Arlo laughed. The laugh surprised both of them. Tobias clapped him on the shoulder, hard for an old man, and the two of them walked together toward the Quonset, and Scout met them halfway and walked Tobias the rest of the way in the way Scout had decided sometime in the last 24 hours that this house was now his to introduce. Inside, Edna had laid breakfast on the small table. Bacon Grover had brought on Thursday. Biscuits she had made on the camp stove that morning. Coffee strong enough to remind a man what coffee had been before it had been ruined by progress. Tobias took off his hat. He hung it on a nail Arlo had driven into the wall beside the door. He sat down at the table without being asked the way men of a certain age sit down at tables that other men of a certain age have set. And he ate 2 biscuits and 3 pieces of bacon and drank a cup of coffee black before he said anything about why he had come. Then he wiped his mouth. He looked at Edna across the table. He said, "Eleanor." She did not blink. She knew the name was coming. "Eleanor," he said again more softly. "Your mother-in-law sat in my office on the 12th of April, 1989. She brought a sealed envelope. She would not tell me what was in it. She asked me to drive her to the bus station the next morning at 6 o'clock. I drove her. She came back 2 days later. She thanked me for not asking. I did not ask. I have not opened a single envelope in your family's business for 49 years without being instructed to. I have been carrying that morning in my chest like a stone since the day she died. I'm very glad to be done carrying it." Edna placed her hand over his on the table. "You can put it down," she said. "We have it now." Tobias bowed his head for a moment. When he raised it again, he was a lawyer. "Show me," he said. She showed him. She showed him everything. The letters from Wendell, the letter from Harriet, the ledger, the stock certificates, the bearer bonds, the savings passbook, the map, the wooden box from beneath the fieldstone, the rifle, the cigar box. She showed him the notebook last. She slid it across the table to him. He opened it. He read. He read all the way through. He did not skip a single page. when he reached the last entry dated 3 days ago. The entry that said, "Grover Mass told Arlo there are men in town asking after us. Whoever is asking knows about the cellar." He closed the notebook gently and set it down on the table between them. He put his hand flat on the top of the cover. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes. This notebook is going in a safe in my office on Monday morning, and it is going to stay there until you tell me to take it out." "All right. And we are going to make copies on Sunday before Merritt arrives, so that if anything happens to the original, I have the copies, and your son's lawyer knows I have the copies." "All right. And on Sunday when he comes?" "Yes. You are going to do all the talking. Arlo is going to sit beside you. I am going to sit at the other end of the table, and Scout is going to be wherever Scout wants to be. That is what I was going to do anyway." Tobias Wren smiled then. It was a slow smile. The smile of an old country lawyer who has been waiting most of his career to have a single perfect afternoon, and has now been told he is about to get one. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "I have known you for 38 years. I have liked you for all 38. I'm going to tell you something now that I have never told you before." "What?" "You are the most dangerous woman I have ever met in this county, and your son is about to find out." Arlo laughed. Edna did not. She only looked at Tobias Wren across the small wooden table, and she said very quietly, "I am not dangerous, Tobias. I am tired. There is a difference. And on Sunday afternoon, my son is going to learn what the difference is." Sunday came on a low gray sky. The wind had eased. The temperature had risen 4 degrees overnight. The kind of false thaw that comes in late March in central Iowa and lies to a person about spring before snapping back cold by Wednesday. Edna spent the morning quietly. She washed her face in well water Arlo had heated on the camp stove. She combed her gray hair back from her temples with a tortoiseshell comb that had belonged to her mother. She put on the same wool coat she had worn to the auction, because it was the coat in which she had begun this, and she had decided last night that it would be the coat in which she ended it. She made coffee at noon, a whole pot. She set out 4 cups on the small table by the stove. She set out a plate of plain shortbread cookies she had baked Saturday afternoon because Harriet Calloway had always set out shortbread cookies when a difficult conversation was about to happen at her kitchen table. And Edna had learned long ago that some things you do not improve. You inherit them. At 1:30, Tobias Wren arrived. He hung his hat on the nail by the door. He sat down at the end of the table where Edna had placed his chair. He did not eat a cookie, but he placed one on a napkin in front of him, the way a chess player places a captured piece beside the board where the other player can see it. At 1:45, Arlo took his place at Edna's right hand. At 1:55, they heard the sedan. It came up the gravel slow. The engine of a car that costs more than a man should pay for a car. Tires that crunched the way expensive tires crunch on country gravel. Scout's head came up from his place beside Edna's foot. He looked at the door. He did not growl. He did not stand. He simply settled his chin onto his paws and waited the way a dog waits when a dog has decided that the situation is in hand. The car door opened outside. A car door closed. Footsteps on the gravel. A pause. Then the small, careful knock of a man who is about to do something. he has practiced. Edna did not move. Arlo did not move. Tobias Wren said in his courtroom voice, "Come in." The door slid back. Merritt Calloway stepped inside. He was 54 years old. He was wearing a charcoal overcoat that had not been bought in Granger County. His hair, which had gone gray at the temples in the last year, had been combed forward over his forehead in the careful way men who are losing their hair comb it forward. He was holding a leather portfolio under his right arm. He had brought no gift. He had brought no flowers. He had brought a portfolio like a man who has come to a meeting. He saw the three of them at the table. He saw the lawyer. His face did the small, fast adjustment of a man who had not expected a lawyer. "Mom," he said. Edna did not stand up. She did not smile. She did not invite him to sit. She only looked at him from her seat at the table by the stove, and she let the moments stretch out until Merritt's polished shoes began to shift on the concrete floor of the Quonset. "Mom," he said again. "Dad, I didn't realize you had company." "Tobias is not company," Edna said. "He is my lawyer." The word "my" landed in the room like a stone dropped into a still pond. Merritt's eyes flickered. Not to her. To Arlo. He was checking the way he had been checking his whole adult life to see what his father thought of what his mother had just said. Arlo Calloway looked back at his son. He said nothing. He did not have to. Edna gestured to the empty chair across from her. The chair that had been placed deliberately on the far side of the table between her and Tobias. Not at her side, not at Arlo's. Across. "Sit down, Merritt," she said. He sat. He set the leather portfolio on the table. Edna's eyes went to the portfolio and stayed there for a beat longer than was comfortable. "You brought paperwork to your mother's house," she said. I brought some things I wanted to go over with you. With both of you. About the property and about Grandpa Wendell's situation." "Grandpa Wendell's situation?" "Yes. Merritt, your grandfather has been dead for 48 years. He does not have a situation." Merritt's mouth opened. It closed. Tobias Wren took a small, slow sip of his coffee. Edna folded her hands on the table in front of her. "Merritt," Edna said, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to say some things now, and I am only going to say them once. And when I am done, I want you to leave this house. And I want you to drive back to wherever it is you have been driving from. And I want you to understand that you are not coming back to this land while I am alive on it." "Mom." "I am not finished." He closed his mouth. She did not raise her voice. She had never in 54 years of being his mother raised her voice to him. She did not begin now. "I saw you," she said. "I saw you 18 months ago. I saw you in November of the year before last, when you asked your father about his blood pressure medication twice in one visit. I saw you in February of last year when you took a phone call in our mudroom and said the word mother to whoever was on the other end, the way a man says it when he is reporting on her. I saw you in July when you brought your father a courtesy power of attorney for medical decisions and put it in front of him on a Sunday afternoon when you knew I was at church. I saw you in September when your sister stopped calling on Sundays and started calling on Wednesdays. I saw you in October when the man from the title office left a voicemail at the farm asking for Mr. Merritt Calloway, who did not live there. I saw you on December the 1st when the sheriff came to my door and you were standing on my porch behind him, and you would not meet my eyes." She paused. Merritt's face had gone the color of dry plaster. "I saw all of it, Merritt. Every step, every visit, every phone call. I wrote it down. I kept a notebook. I have kept that notebook for 18 months. It is in Tobias's safe right now, and a copy is in another safe in his office in Granger. And Tobias's clerk knows where the third copy is, and if anything ever happens to me or to your father or to this house, that notebook is going to a federal investigator on the same afternoon. Do you understand?" He did not answer. "Merritt, do you understand?" "Yes." "Good. Now I want you to understand the second thing." She lifted her hand and laid it flat on the table beside the leather portfolio he had brought. She did not touch the portfolio. She did not need to. "You came here today because someone in Des Moines told you we opened a safe deposit box on Friday. I do not know which one of them told you. I will find out eventually because Tobias is good at finding out, and your grandfather paid him in advance for 40 years of patience that he never had to use until now. But what I want you to know today in this room is that whatever is in that portfolio in front of you, whatever document you brought, whatever claim, whatever theory of family trust, whatever clever instrument your lawyer in the city helped you draft, none of it touches what your grandfather left us." "Mom, you don't. I am not finished." He stopped. "Your grandfather left this land to your father. He left the contents of the Quonset to your father. He left the savings to your father. He left the certificates and the bonds to your father. And he left a letter in his own hand dated 1948, instructing the bank and any future court that the contents of safe deposit box 443 were the personal effects of his only son, with no claim available to any descendant other than that son and his wife. He prepaid the box for 74 years to make sure no clerical accident in a future merger would unseat that instruction. He worked harder to make this airtight, Merritt, than you have worked at anything in your life. And he did it because he had seen in his own family what one greedy heir can do to two old people. He was 36 years old in 1948. He had already learned. He spent the next 30 years building a wall around the people he loved, so that the people he loved would not be eaten alive by the people who shared their blood. She paused. She breathed. "You are the reason the wall existed, Merritt. He did not know you. You had not been born, but he knew that someone like you would come. He has been beating you to this room since before you had a name." The silence in the Quonset was complete. The stove ticked. Scout did not move. Tobias Wren took another sip of his coffee, slow, ceremonial. Merritt's hands were on the table. The hands were trembling. Not much, but enough. "Mom," he said very quietly, "I didn't. It wasn't like that. The investments, they really did go bad. I was trying to help. I was trying to keep the farm in the family. Merritt. I was. Merritt. Stop." He stopped. Edna leaned forward slightly. She was 79 years old. She weighed 112 pounds. She had not raised her voice once in this entire conversation. And in that moment, she was the largest thing in the room. "I'm not asking you to confess. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm too old for either of those things to do me any good. I am telling you that the time when you could lie to me has ended. It ended in a basement vault in Des Moines on Friday morning. It ended when a woman named Dorothea Finch put her hands on my shoulders and told me that someone had been hunting my father-in-law's box for 6 months. I will not ask you who told you about Des Moines. I will not ask you which of your contacts at the title office handed you the address of this Quonset. I will not ask you any of it. I am simply telling you today that the part of your life in which you could come into my kitchen and lie to my face is over. Do you understand? Yes. Say it. It's over. Good. She straightened. She turned her head slightly toward Tobias. He nodded once. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He drew out a folded letter on heavy paper. He passed it across the table to Merritt without speaking. "What is this?" Merritt said. "That is a letter from my office." Tobias said, "Addressed to you and to your sister Phyllis, informing you both that any future contact with your parents regarding their property, their finances, their persons, or their affairs of any kind will be conducted through me. Not through them. Not in their kitchen. Not in their hospital rooms. Not on their telephone. Through me. You will read that letter. You will sign the acknowledgement on the second page. You will leave the original copy on this table. And then you will go home." Merritt looked down at the letter. He did not open it. He looked up at Edna instead. His eyes were wet. He had not cried in front of his mother since he was 9 years old. She did not know whether the wet was real or whether the wet was a tool. She had stopped being able to tell somewhere around his 30th birthday. She had grieved that loss longer than she had grieved her own mother. "Mom," he said, "please, I'm still your son." "Yes," Edna said, "you are. And that is the only reason you walked into this room alive instead of being met by men with badges. Your grandfather built a wall to protect us from you, Merritt. I am the wall now. You can come to it. You can stand at it. You can write to me through Tobias. You can repent if you decide to. You can do 30 years of hard, quiet work. And you can become, perhaps, by the time you are an old man, the kind of son I could let in again. I will be dead by then. But your father might not be. And if you do that work, he may live to see the back of your hand on a Sunday afternoon at a kitchen table. Somewhere I will not be alive to see. That is what I have for you, Merritt. That is everything I have." She stopped. She breathed in. She breathed out. "Now sign the letter." He signed the letter. His hand was shaking too much to make a clean signature. The signature was crooked. Tobias did not correct him. He simply took the signed page, slid it into a folder, and placed the folder in the leather case at his feet. Merritt stood up. He picked up his portfolio. He had not opened it. He had not laid a single page of it on the table. Whatever he had brought into this room he was carrying back out unread. The portfolio looked smaller leaving than it had looked coming in. He paused at the door. He turned. He looked not at his mother but at his father. "Dad," he said. Arlo Calloway looked back at his son for a long moment. Then Arlo did the thing that broke the room. He did not speak. He stood up slowly the way an old man with a bad knee stands up from a chair. And he walked the 8 steps from the table to the door, and he stopped 2 feet in front of his son. And he looked at him without anger, and without forgiveness, and without any of the things Merritt might have been hoping for. And he said in a voice so low, it almost did not carry to the table, "You are my son. I will love you until I die. I will not see you again." He turned. He walked back to his chair. He sat down. Merritt stood at the door for 10 seconds longer than he should have. Then he left. The sedan started. The gravel crunched. The engine sound faded into the long, flat sound of a county afternoon. Edna lowered her face into her hands. She did not cry. She had cried enough. She had cried in a cellar by lantern light. And she had cried in a bank vault in Des Moines. And she had cried over the kind of son she had once carried inside her own body and had now finished carrying inside her heart. She was not going to cry over what had walked out the door. She was going to save what was left of her crying for the things in this life that were still worth crying for. She breathed for a while. Arlo put his hand on the back of her neck. Scout came up from beside her foot and laid his chin on her thigh. Tobias Wren stood up. He carried his coffee cup to the wash basin. He rinsed it. He set it upside down on the rack. He came back to the table. He laid one careful hand on Edna's shoulder. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes. I have been a lawyer in this county for 58 years. I have just witnessed the finest hour of work I have ever seen a client do." She looked up. She tried to smile. She did not quite manage it. But she nodded once, and that was enough for him. He gathered his coat. He took his hat from the nail. He stopped at the door and turned and looked at her one more time across the small lit space of the Quonset. "On Monday," he said, "I am going to file the final paperwork on this land. I am going to put it in both your names, yours first. You're going to be the senior owner of record Eleanor. Your husband is going to be the second. That is what your father-in-law wanted. I have a letter to that effect that he signed in my office in 1977. He paused. He sat in my office on a Tuesday afternoon and dictated it to me, and I have been carrying it in a folder marked Hollow Creek for 49 years. I would like to give it to you next week if that is all right." "Yes," Edna said quietly. "I would like that." He smiled. He left. In the long quiet that came after the sound of his Buick faded down the gravel, Edna and Arlo sat at the small wooden table in the Quonset, and the fire burned in the barrel stove, and Scout slept across both their feet, and outside the false thaw began just a little to give way back to the cold. Spring came late that year. It came the way spring comes in Iowa in fits and reversals with snow in April, and fall starts in May, and a single warm day in the middle of March that fools every old man into thinking the worst is over. But by the second week of May, the ground at Hollow Creek Road had finally given over to green. The weeds Edna had cleared in March came back tentatively. The vines on the south end of the Quonset put out their first careful leaves. The oak stand at the northwest corner of the 3 acres turned from gray to gold, to that deep, heavy green oaks turned to last. The land began slowly to do what Wendell Calloway had written in his journal in 1946. It began to provide. Edna planted a garden in April. tomatoes, beans, squash, a row of zinnias along the south wall of the Quonset, because Harriet had always planted zinnias along the south wall of any house she had lived in. And Edna had decided somewhere around her 68th birthday that the small inherited gestures of women you have loved are worth keeping. The zinnias came up red and orange and yellow by the end of June, and from the gravel turnaround in front of the Quonset, they looked in the late afternoon like a row of small lit candles laid along the foundation. Arlo restored the tractor. It took him most of the summer. Wendell's 1947 Farmall Model M, the one he had bought new from the dealership in Granger the summer Arlo had been 1 year old, the one he had hidden in the Quonset under canvas tarps the same year. Arlo worked on it in the mornings when his back was at its best, and Scout lay across the workshop door and supervised. When the engine turned over for the first time in early August on a Wednesday morning at 9:15, Arlo sat in the driver's seat for 40 minutes without moving the tractor an inch. He just sat there with both hands on the wheel and the engine running. And Edna stood in the door of the workshop with a tin cup of coffee in her hand and watched her husband sit in his father's seat. And she understood in that moment what some letters had been trying to tell her for half a century. Scout led her to the cedar box in late August. He led her the way he led her to everything. He came to her one morning while she was sorting through the last of the cellar, and he sat down in front of a shelf she had not yet reached, and he looked at her with those amber eyes, and she knew. The cedar box was small, the size of a recipe file. The wood had been chosen, she could see, for its tightness of grain. Wendell had built it himself. The joints were perfect. She opened it on the workshop bench with Arlo standing beside her with Scout sitting at her feet. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Wendell to Harriet, Harriet to Wendell. From 1946 through 1991. 45 years of correspondence between two people who had lived in the same house and slept in the same bed and still somehow found things to say to each other in writing that they could not say across a kitchen table. Edna read them in order. She read them over 3 days. She read them out loud to Arlo when he wanted to hear them and silently when she needed to be alone with them. And she folded each one back into its envelope and set it back into the cedar box in the same order Wendell and Harriet had kept them in. On the second day, she found the letter Harriet had written but never sent. It was dated October of 1955. It was addressed to the woman my son will marry. Edna sat down on the workshop bench when she found it. She set the rest of the letters carefully aside. She held the unsent envelope in her hands for a long moment before she opened it. The handwriting on the outside had been Harriet's but younger. Harriet at 38. A woman with a 10-year-old son and a husband who had begun quietly to bury things on 3 acres of land, 70 miles east of where she sat. The letter inside was 3 pages. Edna read it slowly. It said that Harriet had been thinking all summer about the kind of woman her son would marry someday. It said that Harriet had decided on a Tuesday in August that the woman her son needed would not be the kind of woman the neighbors expected. It said that the woman her son needed would be a woman who could stay, not because she had no choice, but because she chose to every morning the way some people choose prayer. It said, I hope she is patient. I hope she is private. I hope she keeps things to herself that she does not need to share, and shares things she does not need to keep. I hope she laughs at my husband's terrible jokes the way I have laughed at them for 16 years, which is to say, not too much and not too little. I hope she is the kind of woman who saves something in a sewing box for a bad day she has not yet seen. Edna stopped reading. She put the letter down on her knees. She looked slowly at Arlo across the workshop. He looked back at her. He did not understand yet. He did not have all the pieces. He had not been told this whole long marriage, the full shape of the white envelope in the sewing box. She decided, sitting on that workshop bench in the late August light, that he was going to be told now. Arlo, she said. Yes. There is something I have not told you. About the $900. He waited. I told you in the van that I started saving it in 1987. I did not tell you why. All right. In 1987, in the month of June, your father's brother, your Uncle Wallace, he came to visit us at the farm. Do you remember? Yes. You took him out to the south pasture to look at the soybeans. I stayed in the kitchen with Owen and your aunt. And while you were in the field, your Uncle Wallace took your aunt aside in the hallway by the back door, and he told her in a voice he thought I could not hear from the kitchen that he had decided that when he died he was going to leave nothing to his own children. He said his sons were going to take whatever he left and waste it. He said the only safe inheritance was an inheritance that the heirs did not know existed. I remember Wallace saying that, Arlo said quietly. He said it at the table, after supper. He said it out loud. Yes, but he said it to your aunt first, in the hallway. And your aunt said back to him in a voice that surprised me because I had never liked your aunt, and I had never thought she was a wise woman. Your aunt said back to him, Wallace, if you are going to keep secrets from your sons, then you'd better make sure your wife is keeping one too. Because the day will come when the secret you kept will not be the one that matters. The one that matters will be the one she kept. And you started saving the next month. I started saving the next morning. Arlo did not speak for a long time. Then he came across the workshop and he sat down on the bench beside her. And he put his arm around her shoulders and he kissed the side of her head, the way he had been kissing the side of her head since they were 19 years old. Edna Calloway, he said. Yes, you saved us. We saved each other. That is what 62 years looks like. She leaned into him. The cedar box of letters sat on the bench beside them. She closed the box. She set it aside. And then she reached underneath the workbench into a small shelf cut into the wood, and she lifted out a third object that Scout had led her to that same morning before Arlo had come out to the workshop. A small box, velvet, the color of old wine. She had not shown it to him yet. She held it on her knees now. Scout found this too, she said. It was tucked under the bench, inside a tin coffee can. I think your father put it there the year before he died after he had finished hiding the cellar key on the home property. Your mother wrote in her letter that she did not know where Wendell hid the key. I think this was hidden the same way, by the same hand, for the same kind of reason. Arlo's hand went to the box. He opened it. Inside, on a small cushion of white silk that had yellowed only at the edges, was a thin gold band. A woman's wedding ring. Plain. No stone. Worn smooth on the inside by 60 years of a finger that had washed dishes and pressed shirts, and held a baby's head and closed a husband's eyes for the last time. It was Harriet's. Arlo had not seen it since the day his mother died. He lifted it from the velvet. He turned it. There on the inside, where Harriet had worn a small, smooth groove in the gold against her own skin, was an engraving he had never been close enough to read in life. It said, "For the next root system. With love. H." He looked up at his wife. His mouth worked. He could not speak. She did not need him to. She held out her right hand. "Arlo Calloway," she said. "Yes. Your mother left me her wedding ring. Your father hid it where Scout would find it. They have been waiting 48 years for the right afternoon. Yes. I want you to put it on me." He did. He slid it onto her right hand on the third finger, beside no other ring. The metal was warm from the velvet. It fit her finger as if it had been measured for her by a woman she had loved across a kitchen table for 31 years. She closed her hand around it. She looked at her husband. She said, very quietly, "I am not the same woman I was on the day of the auction." "No," Arlo said, "and I am never going to be that woman again. No." He kissed her hand. Then he kissed her forehead. Then they sat together in the workshop, an old farmer and an old schoolteacher, and a dog gone gray at the muzzle, while the late August sun lowered itself over the oak stand at the northwest corner of the property, and the zinnias along the south wall of the Quonset burned slow and red in the last light. Scout slept at their feet. The land provided. The phone call from Tobias Wren came on the third week of September. Edna was in the garden when Arlo brought the receiver out to her on the long extension cord they had run from the Quonset to the porch in July. She was pulling weeds from the bean rows. Scout was watching her from the shade of the workshop door. She wiped her hands on her apron. She took the receiver. "Tobias, Eleanor, I'm going to keep this short. The State Attorney General's office opened an investigation into your son's investment partnership last week. It is not because of anything we sent them. It is not because of the notebook. It is because one of his other clients filed a complaint about a different transaction 6 months ago, and the audit trail led somewhere. The Attorney General's office found interesting." She closed her eyes. She breathed. "All right. I called because I did not want you to hear it from anyone else. There may be news coverage in the next few weeks. There may be calls from reporters. You do not have to answer any of them. You have my office number. You can refer everything to me. Thank you, Tobias. Eleanor." "Yes." "How do you feel?" She thought about it, the way she thought about every important question. Slowly. Once. "I feel sad," she said. "He had every advantage we gave him, and he chose this anyway. That is not justice, Tobias. That is waste. I am sorry for the families he hurt. I am sorry for his children. I am not glad about any of it." Tobias was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. "You are a better woman than most of us, Eleanor." "No," she said. "I am just an older one." She hung up the receiver. She handed it back to Arlo. She turned back to the bean rows. She pulled 3 more weeds before she let herself sit down on the overturned bucket she had been using as a stool for most of the summer. Arlo sat down beside her. He did not ask. She told him. When she was finished, he nodded once. He said, "I told him at the door that I would not see him again." Yes. I meant it. Yes. But Edna. Yes. I am still his father. Yes, Arlo. You always will be. That does not change. Some loves do not have an off switch. The ones that do are not the real kind. He took her hand. He did not let go for a long time. Scout watched them from the shade. Owen came home in October. He did not call ahead. He simply drove up the gravel one Saturday morning in the second week of October in a small, dusty sedan with a child's car seat in the back, and he stopped the car at the head of the driveway, and he did not get out. Edna saw him from the kitchen window first. She did not run to the door. She did not call to Arlo. She set down the dish towel she was holding and she walked outside, and she crossed the gravel turnaround, and she stopped about 10 feet from her son's car. He rolled the window down. "Mom," he said. "Owen, I didn't call. I wasn't sure if you would say to come." "I would have said to come." He nodded. He did not get out of the car yet. The car seat in the back was empty. She did not ask about it. There would be time. There would be time. "I wanted to come back in May." He said, "I wrote you a letter in May. I never sent it." "I know. You know I wrote it. I know you wanted to. That is enough." His face crumpled. He had been the kind of boy who tried not to cry in front of his mother. He had been the kind of man who succeeded most of the time. He did not succeed today. He put his hands over his face inside the car, and he wept the way a man weeps when he has finally found the door at the end of a long hallway. And Edna stood in the gravel and let him weep, because she had learned over 31 years in a classroom that the right thing to do when somebody is finally letting themselves cry is to stand close enough to be felt and far enough away to leave room. When he could breathe again, he opened the car door. He got out. He did not come to her right away. He stood beside his car, his hand still on the door, and he looked across the 3 acres at the Quonset and the workshop and the garden full of late-season squash and the zinnias along the south wall. "Mom," he said. "Yes. You built this. We built this. Your father, me, Scout, your grandfather mostly before any of us were born. It's beautiful, Mom. Come and see the garden. Your grandmother would have recognized the work." He came. He walked beside her across the gravel. He did not try to hug her. He understood in the way he had always understood things he had been too afraid to name, that today was not a hugging day. Today was a walking beside day. She showed him the squash. She showed him the late beans. She showed him the row of zinnias. She told him briefly about Harriet's zinnias. He listened. When they reached the south end of the Quonset, she stopped. She turned to him. "Owen." "Yes. You wrote me a letter in February. I read it. I did not write back for a reason." "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes. You were waiting to see if I would do the work." "And He looked down at the zinnias. "I have been volunteering at the food bank in Cedar Rapids since March. Every Saturday. I unload trucks. I do not run the donor calls. I do not do anything that looks good on a resume. I unload trucks. I sweep the floor. I close on Saturday nights and lock the door behind me at 9 o'clock. Why? Because you cannot fake unloading trucks." She nodded slowly. "Owen Calloway," she said. "Yes. You have your grandmother's stubbornness." His face moved. It was almost a smile. "Is that good?" he said. "It is the best thing I have ever said about a man in my family." He laughed then, a small, broken, hopeful laugh. She did not hug him. Not yet. But she turned and she walked toward the Quonset, and she said over her shoulder in the steady voice she had used for 62 years to bring her family into rooms they were not sure they were welcome in, "Come inside. Your father is going to want to see you. He has been waiting since May. He has never said so. But I know." Owen followed her inside. Scout met them at the door and walked Owen across the threshold, the way Scout had walked Tobias Wren across the threshold in March, the way Scout had walked every person across this threshold who Scout had decided in that moment was meant to come in. The first snow came on the 8th of November. It fell light the way the first snow of an Iowa winter falls. The flakes were large and slow. They settled on the curved roof of the Quonset and outlined every rib of the steel in white. They settled on the workshop. They settled on the gravel of the driveway and on the brown stalks of the garden where the zinnias had been, and on the head of the fieldstone marker out in the clearing. Edna and Arlo sat on the porch they had built in August. Scout lay between them on a folded wool blanket. He was 12 now. His muzzle had gone almost entirely gray. He moved more slowly. He napped longer. The arthritis that had begun in his hips in March had spread to his shoulders by October, but his eyes were still bright, and his tail, when his name was spoken, still moved in slow, certain time. Edna had written one last letter that morning. She had written it at the small wooden table by the stove. She had not written it to anyone in particular. She had not written it to Owen. She had not written it to her grandchildren, whom she had not seen in 2 years, and who might or might not someday find their way back to a small property on Hollow Creek Road. She had written it the way Wendell had written his ledger, and the way Harriet had written her unsent letter long ago. She had written it for whoever found it. It said, "A woman who keeps something for the worst day is not being secretive. She is being faithful. The people who love you most often speak in silence and in preparation, and in the small private accountings of a life that nobody else sees. Home is not a place you are given. It is a place you choose and keep choosing every morning for as long as you are able. There is no inheritance more honest than the one that arrives when you have decided you no longer need it. Trust the dog. Trust the man who has stayed. Trust the woman in the kitchen who has been writing things down in a notebook you did not know existed. Trust the cedar box on the workshop shelf. Trust the silence that holds. The land provides for those who do not give up on it. I did not give up on it. Neither in the end did anyone who loved me. She had folded the letter. She had placed it in the cedar box on the workshop shelf with the letters from Wendell and Harriet, and the unsent letter to the woman my son will marry, and she had closed the lid. Now she sat on the porch with her husband. The snow fell. Arlo's hand found hers. He turned the gold ring on her finger once slow, the way Harriet had turned it in her own kitchen. Scout's tail moved once, twice, 3 times against the wool blanket. Down the gravel, headlights came on. A small, dusty sedan turning into the drive. Owen, coming for Sunday lunch. The way he had been coming for Sunday lunch every other Sunday since the 2nd week of October. The way he would perhaps keep coming for a long time. Edna lifted her face into the snow. She closed her eyes. She breathed. She was home. Not because she had no other choice. Not because Wendell Calloway had left it to her in a letter in a vault in Des Moines. And not because Harriet Calloway had foretold her in a letter in a cedar box in a workshop on Hollow Creek Road. She was home because she had chosen it. Coin by coin, year by year, sewing box by sewing box, long before she had known it would matter, long before any of them had known. The sedan pulled up. The engine turned off. A car door opened and closed. Scout lifted his head from the blanket and looked toward the sound, and his old gray tail moved once slow and welcome. Edna Calloway opened her eyes and watched her last son walk up the gravel toward the porch she had built with her own hands, and the snow fell soft and even across 3 acres of land that nobody had wanted, and she thought very clearly in the voice she had used for 31 years at the front of a classroom in Granger County, Iowa. We are still here. We are still here. We are still here.